The deed trembled in my hands. My childhood home now legally belonged to a man I'd met only weeks before. A spiritual advisor who'd appeared in my parents' lives and slowly consumed their world while I built my career overseas. "Your parents have made a free choice," Dr. Thorne had said with that practiced smile as my mother nodded vacantly beside him. I was supposed to accept this. Be reasonable. Walk away from the house my grandfather had promised would be mine. But something cold crystallized inside me that day, a clarity I'd never known before. They assumed I would fold, retreat to my life abroad, become a sad story they'd whisper about at their spiritual retreats. What Dr. Thorne and his followers failed to understand was that 4 generations of my family had poured their souls into those walls. And while I might have inherited my grandfather's eyes and my father's stubborn chin, I'd also inherited something they couldn't see, a determination that, once awakened, would burn through their carefully constructed deception like wildfire. They'd stolen my heritage believing I wouldn't fight back. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The Bennett house stood on Maple Street exactly as I remembered it. 3 stories of Victorian charm with gingerbread trim, a wraparound porch, and the stained glass window my grandfather had salvaged from a demolished church in 1952. I paused on the sidewalk, my suitcase handle gripped tight in my fist, taking in the familiar sight after 5 long years away. The morning sunlight caught the beveled glass of the front door, sending prisms dancing across the porch, just like they had throughout my childhood. "It'll be yours someday, Raylan," my grandfather had told me, his weathered hand clasping mine as he lay in his hospital bed. "You're the only one who truly appreciates what this home means to our family." I'd been 22 then, headed to London for what was supposed to be a 1-year architecture internship. That 1 year turned into 5, with video calls replacing Sunday dinners and text messages standing in for the conversations we used to have on that porch swing. Now at 27, I was back in Millfield, Massachusetts, supposedly for a 2-week visit that coincided with my remote work period. The front door swung open before I could reach for the brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, another of my grandfather's salvage finds. "Raylan," Mom rushed out, arms wide. Her hug felt familiar, but something in her appearance caught me off guard. Her usually classic bob had grown out, and she wore a flowing white tunic instead of her typical tailored blouse. "We've been counting the days." Dad appeared behind her, his smile warm but his eyes somehow different, brighter, more intense than I remembered. He too looked changed, his business casual style replaced by linen pants and a collarless shirt I couldn't imagine him wearing to his accounting firm. "Welcome home, sweetheart." He embraced me, smelling of unfamiliar incense rather than his signature cologne. "We have so much to share with you." The foyer welcomed me with its black and white marble tiles and the sweeping staircase I'd slid down countless times as a child, earning scoldings from Mom and secret high fives from Grandpa. The crystal chandelier still cast rainbow reflections on the walls, but several pieces of furniture were missing. The antique console table that had displayed 4 generations of family photos was gone, replaced by a minimalist white table bearing a single object, a glass pyramid etched with an unfamiliar symbol. "We've made some changes," Mom said, following my gaze. Dr. Thorne helped us understand the importance of creating spaces that allow energy to flow freely. "Dr. Thorne," I set my suitcase down, noting other subtle differences, the absence of family photos, empty spots where cherished antiques had stood. "Our spiritual advisor," Dad replied with an enthusiasm I'd previously only heard when he discussed the Red Sox making the playoffs. "He's the founder of the Sanctuary of Divine Purpose. It's changed our lives, Raylan. We can't wait for you to experience it." Mom clasped her hands together. "In fact, we've arranged for you to attend tonight's gathering. Dr. Thorne specifically asked to meet you when he heard you were visiting." The kitchen, at least, remained largely unchanged. The heart pine floors, the soapstone counters, the copper pots hanging from the ceiling rack. I gratefully accepted the herbal tea Mom offered, though I yearned for the coffee she used to brew. "Sugar?" I asked, not seeing the crystal bowl that had always sat on the counter. "We've eliminated refined sugars," Dad explained, sliding a jar of raw honey toward me. "The sanctuary teaches that purifying the body is the first step towards spiritual enlightenment." As we talked, I noticed more changes, subtle but unmistakable. Mom and Dad finished each other's sentences with phrases that sounded rehearsed. They referenced vibrational alignment and prosperity consciousness as naturally as they once discussed neighborhood gossip or Dad's golf game. Most concerning was the way they kept mentioning financial decisions, the considerable donations they'd made to renovate the sanctuary's new gathering space, the spiritual investment portfolios they'd established. "I thought you were saving that money for retirement," I said carefully, remembering their lifelong frugality and detailed financial planning. "Physical security is an illusion," Dad replied with a serene smile I didn't recognize. "Dr. Thorne has helped us understand that true security comes from spiritual alignment and contribution to the greater purpose." That afternoon, I escaped to my old bedroom, relieved to find it mostly untouched. My old books still lined the shelves, and the window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading remained plump with the cushions Grandma had sewn. Sitting there now, I ran my fingers over the worn velvet, remembering rainy afternoons spent watching water stream down the wavy antique glass while Grandpa told me stories about each piece of the house he'd lovingly restored. I recalled the summer we'd spent refinishing the original woodwork, Grandpa patiently teaching me how to apply linseed oil in smooth, even strokes. "This house tells our family story," he'd said. "Every scratch and dent is a memory. When this becomes your home, you'll add your own chapters to that story." The memory of his promise prompted me to call my childhood friend Emma Jenkins, now a reporter for the local newspaper. Raylan Bennett, finally back from conquering London. Emma's warm laugh was a balm to my unsettled spirits. "Just visiting," I clarified. "But Emma, something weird is going on with my parents." "Let me guess, the Sanctuary of Divine Purpose? You know about it?" Emma's voice dropped. "I've been researching them for months, but I can't get my editor to greenlight a story without more concrete evidence. They arrived about 2 years ago and have been rapidly expanding. They're buying up properties all over town, especially in the historic district where your parents' house is." My stomach tightened. My parents mentioned donations, but not real estate. "Meet me for coffee tomorrow at Brewster's?" There are things I shouldn't say over the phone. That evening, I reluctantly accompanied my parents to the sanctuary, which operated from a converted warehouse on the edge of town. The austere exterior gave way to a lavishly appointed interior with plush white furniture, crystal sculptures, and an elaborate stage framed by shimmering fabric panels. About 60 people milled about, all dressed in variations of white and cream, many wearing jewelry bearing the same pyramid symbol I'd seen in our foyer. "Margaret, Thomas, welcome." A tall man with salt and pepper hair and penetrating blue eyes approached us. Despite the warm May evening, he wore a crisp white suit that somehow didn't seem out of place on him. And this must be the accomplished daughter I've heard so much about. "Dr. Elias Thorne," Mom introduced with reverence in her voice. "This is our daughter, Raylan." His handshake lingered uncomfortably as he studied my face. "The Bennett eyes. I see the same spiritual perception I've noted in your parents. You've returned at precisely the right moment in your soul's journey." "I'm just visiting for 2 weeks," I corrected, withdrawing my hand. "The universe operates on its own timetable, not our limited human calendars." His smile revealed perfect teeth, too white to be natural. "I understand you're an architect, creating physical spaces that nurture the human experience. At the sanctuary, we build spiritual structures that house the eternal soul." The conversation continued in this vein, with Thorne displaying an unsettling knowledge of my career achievements and personal life. More disturbing was how he casually mentioned plans for a sanctuary community center to be built in this very neighborhood. "We've been blessed with property acquisitions that align perfectly with our vision," he said, his gaze sliding meaningfully toward my parents. "The universe provides for those who serve its higher purpose." The service itself was a bizarre blend of self-help platitudes, prosperity gospel, and New Age spirituality. Thorne paced the stage speaking about vibrational gateways to prosperity and the burden of family legacy patterns. His eyes found mine repeatedly during his sermon about releasing ancestral properties to serve the greater good. On the drive home, my parents enthused about Thorne's powerful message, while I sat silently in the back seat, remembering Emma's concerns and formulating questions about this community center. The next morning, I met Emma at Brewster's Coffee, the local cafe where we'd spent countless hours during high school. She arrived with a folder tucked under her arm, her reporter's notebook already filled with scribbled notes. "It's worse than I thought," she said after we'd exchanged hugs. "The sanctuary has acquired 7 properties in the historic district in the past year, all from elderly residents or people going through life transitions." "What are they doing with the properties?" "That's the thing. Nothing yet. They're sitting empty, but there's a massive rezoning request working through city planning for a spiritual retreat complex." She slid a document across the table. "This is their proposal, a compound with housing for members, meditation spaces, and commercial areas for their various business enterprises." I studied the map, my heart sinking as I recognized the highlighted properties forming a continuous block, with my family's home sitting squarely in the middle of the unmarked parcels. "They need your parents' house to complete their plan," Emma confirmed. "Have they mentioned selling?" "No, but..." I hesitated, remembering my grandfather's promise. "The house is supposed to come to me eventually. It's been in our family for 4 generations." Emma's expression darkened. "You might want to verify that." 3 of these property transfers involved elders who thought they were just signing papers to let the sanctuary use their homes for meetings or retreats. They didn't realize they were transferring ownership until it was too late. Cold fear washed over me. "I need to see the property records. County clerk's office opens at 9. When I returned home, I slipped into my father's office, once a warm space lined with leather-bound accounting texts and family photographs, now an austere room with white furniture and sanctuary literature stacked neatly on floating shelves. The filing cabinet where he'd kept important documents stood empty, its drawers lined with white contact paper, but holding nothing. The safe behind his desk, where he'd always kept our birth certificates, property deeds, and other vital papers, hung open and barren. Even the family photo albums were missing from their usual place on the bookshelf. "Looking for something?" Mom's voice startled me. "Just some old photos," I lied. "For a project I'm working on." "We've digitized everything important," she said, though I noticed she didn't offer to show me these digital archives. Dr. Thorne taught us that physical attachments keep us tethered to limiting past identities. Later that afternoon, while helping Mom with laundry, one household task that hadn't changed, I discovered a receipt for a safe deposit box at First Millfield Bank, an institution my parents had never used, preferring the credit union where Dad had served on the board for 15 years. The next morning, I drove directly to the county records office, a fluorescent-lit room in the basement of the town hall where ancient deed books shared space with modern computer terminals. The clerk, Mrs. Patterson, had known me since I was a child attending summer programs at the library where she'd volunteered. "Raylan Bennett, how's life in London treating you?" She enveloped me in a powdery-scented hug. "It's good to be home for a visit," I said, returning her embrace. "I'm doing some research on historic properties in town, specifically my parents' house on Maple Street." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you'll want to speak with your parents about that, dear. I'd like to see the current deed, if that's possible." She hesitated before leading me to a computer terminal. "Property records are public information, of course. Here you go." My hands trembled as I searched the database, finding our address and clicking to view the current deed. The document that appeared on screen stole my breath, a warranty deed transferring ownership from Thomas and Margaret Bennett to the Sanctuary of Divine Purpose, with Dr. Elias Thorne listed as trustee. The transfer date was exactly 2 weeks before my arrival. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. Mrs. Patterson patted my shoulder. "I thought it strange when they came in. Your father always said that house would be yours someday." "They came in personally?" "To transfer the deed. With that Dr. Thorne fellow. He did most of the talking, something about a spiritual donation for tax purposes. Her voice dropped. Between us, I don't trust that man. 3 other families have done the same thing this year. The Wilsons, the Franklins, and old Mrs. Abernathy. All of them over 60, all long-time residents. My mind raced as I requested printed copies of the deed transfer and thanked Mrs. Patterson. Outside in my rental car, I stared at the official document, its legal language confirming my worst fears. My childhood home, the house my great-grandfather had purchased in 1923, that my grandfather had lovingly restored, that had been promised to me, now legally belonged to Elias Thorne's organization. I drove aimlessly for an hour, processing the betrayal, before finally returning to the house that was no longer ours. Mom and Dad sat in the living room, tension evident in their postures as I entered and wordlessly placed the deed on the coffee table between us. You weren't supposed to find out this way, Dad said after a long silence. How was I supposed to find out? After you'd moved out? Or maybe when I came home for Christmas to find Dr. Thorne hanging stockings on our mantel? My voice shook with rage and hurt. You don't understand the spiritual significance, Mom began. Stop. I held up my hand. No more spiritual significance, vibrational alignment, or any other nonsense. This is our family home. Grandpa promised it would come to me. Your grandfather didn't understand the higher purpose this property could serve, Dad said with infuriating calmness. The sanctuary will transform this neighborhood into a beacon of enlightenment. We've been blessed to contribute to that vision. And what do you get out of this contribution? I demanded. They exchanged a look before Mom answered. We'll have lifetime residence rights in the caretaker's apartment once the main house is converted for sanctuary use. Dr. Thorne has assured us. He's a con man, I exploded. He's systematically targeting elderly residents and people in transitional phases of life. This is real estate fraud dressed up as spirituality. That's enough. Dad's voice hardened. You've been away too long, Raylan. You've lost your connection to what matters. Dr. Thorne has given us purpose, community, and spiritual fulfillment we never found in traditional channels. At the cost of your home, your retirement savings, and your relationship with your daughter, I countered, tears threatening. The doorbell's chime interrupted our confrontation. Mom hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Dr. Thorne himself, his white suit immaculate, his smile practiced. I sense disharmony in our Bennett family alignment, he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of concern. I see you've discovered the blessed transfer before your parents could share the joyous news properly. There's nothing blessed or joyous about it, I snapped. This is predatory and possibly illegal. Raylan, Mom gasped. Thorne's smile remained fixed, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Your parents have made a free choice to contribute to something greater than themselves. The legal documents are impeccable, I assure you. I'd like to speak with you alone, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Of course. He nodded to my parents. Margaret, Thomas, would you mind giving us a moment? Raylan's concerns deserve my full attention. They left reluctantly, casting anxious glances over their shoulders as Thorne settled into Grandpa's old leather chair, the one piece of original furniture that remained in the living room. You're angry, he stated once we were alone. That's natural. Change is difficult for those not spiritually prepared to embrace it. Cut the spiritual garbage. What's your real game here? His facade slipped for just a moment, revealing calculation beneath the benevolence. Your parents have found meaning and purpose with us. They're happy, Raylan. Isn't that what matters? What matters is that you've manipulated vulnerable people into signing over valuable properties for your spiritual retreat that just happens to require millions of dollars in real estate. The universe rewards those who serve its purpose, he said smoothly. Your parents understand this. They're guaranteed lifetime residence in their own private quarters. It's really quite generous. And if they fall out of favor with you, if they question your teachings, what happens to their guaranteed residence then? His smile tightened. Spiritual harmony requires alignment with community values. Those who choose discord naturally separate themselves from the benefits of unity. The threat was unmistakable. "I'll fight this," I promised quietly. "I'll contest the transfer, alert authorities, warn other families, whatever it takes." "That would be unfortunate," Thorne replied, examining his manicured nails. "Such actions might create negative energy that could affect your parents' standing in our community. Their lifetime residence agreement depends on maintaining positive spiritual alignment." He stood, straightening his immaculate suit. "I do hope you'll reconsider once you had time to process. The sanctuary welcomes all who approach with open hearts. Your architectural expertise would be valued in our community center project." After he left, my parents returned, their faces anxious. "You've upset Dr. Thorne," Mom said, wringing her hands. "He's been so good to us, Raylan." "He's using you," I insisted. "Can't you see that?" "We see that our daughter has become cynical during her time away," Dad replied stiffly. "We're leaving tomorrow for a 2-week spiritual retreat at the sanctuary's mountain compound. Dr. Thorne feels it would be best if you used that time to reconsider your position." "And if I don't?" They exchanged another glance before Dad delivered the ultimatum. "Then we expect you to have moved out by the time we return. This is a sanctuary property now, and only those aligned with its purpose can reside here." That night, unable to sleep, I called Emma again. "They've transferred the deed and are leaving for a retreat tomorrow," I explained. "I need to find out what's really going on before they get in any deeper." "I might have a lead," she replied. "A former sanctuary member contacted me after seeing my information requests at the county office. She's scared, but willing to talk. Can you meet us tomorrow at my apartment?" The next morning, I watched my parents pack matching white suitcases into their car. Mom hugged me stiffly, whispering, "Please try to understand," while Dad merely nodded before they drove away. I headed straight to Emma's apartment, where I found her with a nervous-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself only as Patricia. "I was with a sanctuary in Burlington, Vermont," Patricia explained, constantly glancing toward the windows. 2 years ago, it was called the Ascended Path then, but it was the same operation, same teachings, same Thorne, though he went by Dr. Edward Martell there." "What happened in Vermont?" I asked. Patricia's hands trembled as she accepted the tea Emma offered. "It followed the same pattern. First, he acquired properties from devoted followers, always with some legal arrangement that appeared to benefit the original owners. Then came this special retreat, where only the most dedicated were invited. Like the one my parents just left for," I interjected. She nodded grimly. "When they returned, everything had changed. The properties were being sold off, the proceeds moved offshore, and Thorne announced a spiritual relocation to pursue the next phase of enlightenment. Those who'd signed over homes or assets were told their negative energies had disrupted community harmony, voiding their residence agreements. They lost everything," Emma summarized, her reporter's notebook filling with scribbled notes. 7 families became homeless in a single day, Patricia confirmed. "I was lucky. I'd only donated cash, not property. But I watched lifelong friends end up in shelters while Thorne disappeared overnight. 6 months later, I saw an article about a new spiritual community in Massachusetts and recognized him immediately, despite the new name. Why haven't you gone to the authorities?" I demanded. I tried. The paperwork was all legally executed. Everyone had signed voluntarily. Without proof of threats or coercion, it was treated as a civil matter, not criminal. Her eyes filled with tears. By the time lawsuits could be filed, the money was gone and Thorne had vanished. My mind raced. We need to find out if there's a pattern across multiple states. Already working on it, Emma said, showing me a spreadsheet tracking similar operations in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Western New York. Always the same MO, different names for both Thorne and his organization. My parents mentioned a safe deposit box. I remembered suddenly. The receipt was from First Millfield Bank. Can you access it? Emma asked. Not directly, but I thought of my mother's sister in nearby Worcester. My aunt might help. Mom gave her emergency access to important documents years ago. I don't know if that includes this new box, but it's worth trying. 2 hours later, Aunt Deborah and I sat in a private room at First Millfield Bank, staring at the contents of the safe deposit box, the original deed to our house, my parents' wills, insurance policies, and a folder labeled sanctuary contracts. "I can't believe Margaret did this," Aunt Deborah murmured, reviewing the documents. "Your grandfather would be heartbroken." The contracts revealed the full extent of the deception. Not only had my parents transferred ownership of our home, but they'd also taken out a reverse mortgage on the property before the transfer, effectively extracting its equity and leaving them with substantial debt while giving the sanctuary a valuable property. "This isn't just unethical, it might be criminal," Aunt Deborah said, her lawyer's mind analyzing the transaction. "The sequencing of these transactions suggests deliberate intent to defraud. We made copies of everything before returning the originals to the box." Outside the bank, Aunt Deborah gripped my hands. "This is worse than I imagined, Raylan. We need to contact the authorities." But my visit to the local police station proved frustrating. The officer took my statement, but seemed skeptical. "Your parents are adults who signed legal documents," he explained sympathetically. "Without evidence of coercion or incompetence, this is a civil matter, not criminal." "What about the pattern of similar activities in other states?" I pressed. "You'd need to provide documented evidence linking this Dr. Thorne to those other cases," he replied. "And even then, it might not rise to the level of criminal fraud if everyone signed willingly." Discouraged but determined, I returned to the house and made a crucial decision. With Emma's help, I installed a small hidden camera in the living room bookshelf, angled to capture the main seating area where my parents usually met with Thorne. "It's legal to record in your own home in Massachusetts," Emma assured me, though we both knew the house technically wasn't mine anymore. "I need evidence of his manipulation techniques," I explained. "Something concrete I can take to authorities." While waiting for my parents to return, I threw myself into research. Emma connected me with former members of Thorne's previous organizations. I created a detailed timeline of his operations across 4 states, noting the pattern of property acquisitions followed by abrupt disappearances. I hired a private investigator with my savings, who discovered Thorne had operated under at least 3 different names in the past decade: Edward Martell, Elias Thornton, and his current identity, Elias Thorne. The PI also found connections to shell companies that purchased and quickly resold properties in communities where his spiritual organizations had operated. Most disturbing was the discovery that several of Thorne's former followers had died under unclear circumstances shortly after his organizations dissolved, their remaining assets passing to entities we now suspected were controlled by Thorne himself. 2 weeks stretched into 3 as my parents' retreat extended without explanation. My calls went straight to voicemail. The few text responses I received were clearly not written in my mother's usual style, reinforcing my suspicions about the level of control being exerted. I returned to the house one evening to find it had been searched, my laptop missing, drawers rifled through, and my hidden camera discovered and destroyed. The police treated it as a routine burglary despite my protestations about the suspicious timing. That same night, I received an anonymous text containing photos of my London apartment building, clearly meant as a threat. Thorne's reach was longer than I'd imagined. Emma connected me with other families affected by the sanctuary's operations in Millfield. We gathered at her apartment, sharing stories that followed the same pattern: vulnerable people experiencing transitions, the love bombing and initial welcome, the gradual introduction to investment opportunities, and finally the property transfers framed as spiritual contributions. Among these families was Walter Freeman, whose elderly mother had signed over her home 6 months earlier. "She's at that mountain retreat now, too," he said, worry lines etching his face. No direct contact for 3 weeks. The sanctuary staff claimed they're in a communication fast phase of the program. Together, we formed a support group, pooling resources and information. Through this network, I met James, a young man who had briefly worked as Thorne's assistant before becoming disillusioned. "He's accelerating his timeline," James told us in a hushed voice at our 3rd meeting. "After you started asking questions, he moved up the liquidation schedule." They're planning to sell all Millfield properties and relocate the core group to a final sanctuary in Costa Rica within 30 days. My parents are part of that core group, I realized with growing horror. They're considered high-value members because of their financial contributions and social connections, James confirmed. But once the properties are sold, Thorne has no intention of honoring any residence agreements. He never does. With mounting evidence, but no clear legal recourse, I made a desperate decision. I compiled everything we'd gathered: property records, bank statements, witness testimonies, the pattern of operations across multiple states, and James's insider information, into a comprehensive report. Then I submitted it anonymously to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, the State Attorney General's office, and several investigative journalists. For days, nothing happened. I continued my research, working with Emma and our growing network of concerned families, feeling as though we were shouting into the void. Time was running out. According to James, the property sales were already being arranged through private transactions to avoid public listings. Then everything changed in an instant. I opened my door one morning to find two people with serious expressions and crisp suits standing on the porch of what had once been my family home. "Raylan Bennett?" the woman asked, showing me an FBI badge. "Special Agent Diana Wilson. This is my partner, Special Agent Robert Taylor. We need to talk about your report on Dr. Elias Thorne and the Sanctuary of Divine Purpose." FBI. I whispered, my knees suddenly weak. The gravity of what was happening hit me all at once. This wasn't just about a family dispute anymore. This was federal agents on my doorstep. "May we come in?" Agent Wilson asked, her eyes scanning the street behind me with practiced caution. I led them into the living room where just weeks ago, my parents had delivered their ultimatum. The house felt different now, hollower somehow, as if it sensed its fate hanging in the balance. "Your report was incredibly detailed," Agent Taylor said, setting a leather portfolio on the coffee table. It connected several dots in an ongoing investigation across multiple states. "You were already investigating him?" I sank onto the couch, relief and frustration washing over me in equal measure. Agent Wilson nodded. "Edward Mercer, or as you know him, Dr. Elias Thorne, has been on our radar for some time. He's sophisticated, careful, leaves just enough paper trail to prove transactions were legitimate, while keeping his methods just shy of prosecutable fraud." "Then why are you here?" "My parents signed everything willingly." "Patterns," Taylor replied. "One or two questionable property transfers might be coincidence. 7 identical schemes across 4 states suggests organized criminal activity. Your documentation provided the timeline we needed." For the next 2 hours, I shared everything: the property transfer, the reverse mortgage, the threatening text message, the search of my room, the testimonies from former members. The agents recorded my statement, occasionally exchanging glances when particular details aligned with their existing investigation. "What about my parents?" I finally asked. "They're at this mountain retreat. I haven't had real contact with them in weeks." Agent Wilson's expression softened slightly. "The compound is under surveillance. We're building a case methodically to ensure charges will stick. Moving too quickly could jeopardize both the investigation and potentially your parents' safety." Safety. The words stuck in my throat. "You think they're in danger?" When these organizations begin to unravel, the leadership sometimes takes desperate measures, Taylor explained carefully. "We need to proceed with caution." As they prepared to leave, Wilson handed me her card. "Call this number directly if you hear from your parents or Thorne. And Raylan, be careful. Don't confront Thorne or return to the sanctuary. We believe he has people watching this house." After they left, I called Emma, arranging to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over rather than risk being overheard. The weight of the FBI's warnings left me jumping at shadows, checking over my shoulder as I drove unfamiliar routes to avoid being followed. "They're building a case," I explained to Emma at a corner table far from windows. "But they won't move until they have enough evidence." "What about everyone at the compound?" Emma's reporter instincts were evident in her rapid-fire questions. "How many people are we talking about? Are they all there voluntarily?" "I don't know," I admitted. The agents were careful about what they shared, but they seemed concerned about safety if things go sideways. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone vibrating with an incoming call, my mother's number flashing on the screen. I answered immediately, heart pounding. Mom, Raylan. Her voice sounded strange, slurred and distant. Listen carefully. I don't have much time. Mom, where are you? Are you okay? Don't trust. Static interrupted her words. Burning everything tonight. The trucks are. Mom, I can barely hear you. Are you at the compound? Are you safe? Your father's not well. They're saying it's his choice, but the medicines. Raylan, something's wrong with. Her voice cut off abruptly. Mom, I called desperately into the phone. Mom, a different voice came on the line. Male. Unfamiliar. Mrs. Bennett is completing her purification ritual. She'll call you when she's spiritually prepared for communication. The line went dead before I could respond. Emma watched my face crumple. What happened? Something about burning documents, loading trucks. She said Dad isn't well, something about medicine. My hands shook as I dialed Agent Wilson's number. They're accelerating whatever they're planning. Based on my mother's fragmented warning, the FBI moved their timeline forward. Within hours, I found myself in a makeshift command center in a hotel conference room, surrounded by agents reviewing surveillance photos and property documents. The compound is here. Agent Wilson pointed to a map spread across the table. Approximately 30 adults currently on site, including your parents. Satellite imagery shows increased activity in the past 48 hours. Vehicles coming and going, what appears to be document burning in these barrels. What about the medicine my mother mentioned? I asked, fear clawing at my throat. A grim-faced agent I hadn't met before stepped forward. Based on previous cases with similar organizations, it could be a variety of substances, anything from benign herbal supplements to sedatives or hallucinogens used to increase suggestibility. You think they're drugging my father? The room spun around me. We can't confirm that without getting inside, Wilson said carefully. But your mother's call gave us probable cause to expedite the warrants. We move at dawn. I spent a sleepless night in a motel room guarded by an agent, imagining worst-case scenarios and jumping at every sound. By 5 a.m., I sat rigid in the back of an SUV with tinted windows, watching agents in tactical gear prepare for simultaneous raids on both the compound and the sanctuary's headquarters in town. You stay in the vehicle, Wilson instructed firmly. Once the scene is secured, we'll bring your parents to you. The wait was excruciating. Through the vehicle's windows, I watched agents approach the compound's gates with warrants while others secured the perimeter. There was a brief negotiation I couldn't hear, then the gates swung open. Teams of agents moved methodically toward the cluster of buildings as the sun broke over the mountain ridge. Nearly an hour passed before Agent Wilson returned to the SUV, her expression tight. They're gone, she said flatly. Most of them, including your parents and Thorne, left sometime in the early morning hours, probably right after your mother's call. Gone where? I felt the blood drain from my face. We're searching for electronic records now, but initial reports suggest they've moved to a secondary location. The remaining members claim it was a planned spiritual journey to the next phase of enlightenment. Inside the compound, agents discovered evidence of extensive document destruction, shredders still warm, ash barrels containing partially burned papers, and computer hard drives physically removed from devices. But they also found medical supplies that confirmed my fears, prescription sedatives and antipsychotics with no doctor's information on the labels. Was my father being drugged? I asked the agent cataloging the medications. We can't say for certain who these were for, he replied carefully. But they're consistent with controlling behavior and creating dependency. The raid on the sanctuary headquarters in town proved more fruitful. Agents discovered a laptop that had been overlooked in the hasty evacuation, containing encrypted files that specialized FBI technicians were working to access. We found this, Agent Taylor said, handing me a photograph removed from a shredder bin. It showed a rustic property with cabins surrounded by dense forest. Does this look familiar to you? I studied the image, a memory surfacing slowly. I think This might be a property my father mentioned years ago. Some land in the Adirondacks that a client gifted him instead of paying an accounting bill. He always talked about building a hunting cabin there, but never did. Taylor's eyes lit up. Do you know where exactly? Not specifically, but it would be in my father's records. He kept everything meticulously documented. This launched a frantic search through my father's digitized records, recovered partially from cloud storage accounts. By piecing together tax filings, property tax payments, and GPS coordinates from old photos, the FBI team identified a remote property near the New York-Vermont border. Satellite imagery confirms recent activity, the technical analyst reported, showing thermal imaging that revealed multiple heat signatures consistent with human occupation. Approximately 20 people, based on these readings. As the FBI coordinated with New York State authorities to execute another search warrant, I paced the hotel room, torn between hope that we'd found my parents and terror at what condition they might be in. The cybercrime team finally broke the encryption on the laptop, revealing a trove of damning evidence, financial records showing millions funneled through shell companies, property transfers across 7 states, and a detailed exit strategy labeled Final Ascension. This isn't just about real estate fraud, Agent Wilson explained grimly. Thorne's planning what he calls a transcendence event, scheduled for tomorrow night. Based on similar language used by other cult leaders historically, we're treating this as a potential mass suicide situation. The word suicide broke something in me. I collapsed into a chair, images of Jonestown and Heaven's Gate flashing through my mind. My parents would never. People under extreme influence, possibly medicated, can be convinced of almost anything, she said gently. That's why we're treating this as a hostage situation now. The raid on the Adirondack property was planned with psychiatric experts and hostage negotiators on standby. I remained at the command center, watching through secure video feeds as agents surrounded the remote compound at dawn. The standoff began with Thorne barricaded inside the main cabin with 8 elite followers, including my parents. We have achieved spiritual readiness for the next plane of existence. Thorne's voice came through negotiators' recordings. Interference from unenlightened authorities will only delay our transcendence. Hour after hour passed with tense negotiations. Thermal imaging showed movement inside the cabin, people gathering in what appeared to be a central room, then dispersing to different areas. He's losing control of the situation, the lead negotiator reported. Some followers are questioning the sudden change in plans. We've established phone contact with 3 people inside who are having doubts. By nightfall, negotiations had convinced Thorne to release the majority of his followers, who emerged from the cabin in white robes, disoriented and clearly affected by some combination of sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and possibly medication. But Thorne himself remained barricaded with 4 Ascension assistants and my parents. Final phase begins at midnight, he announced through the cabin's speaker system, installed for his sermons. The chosen will transcend physical limitations through the purification protocol. These words triggered immediate action from the tactical team. With evidence of imminent danger, they deployed flashbang grenades and breached the cabin's doors simultaneously from multiple entry points. The next few minutes were chaos on the monitors, shouting, tactical lights sweeping through darkened rooms, officers securing stunned cult members. Then, finally, the words I'd been desperately waiting for: civilians secured. All subjects in custody. Medical team requested for evaluation of 2 elderly subjects. The FBI's safe house outside Albany was comfortable but clinical, a 4-bedroom ranch house with government-issue furniture and agents posted at every entrance. I paced the living room, waiting for medical clearance to see my parents. It had been 6 hours since the raid. 6 hours of debriefings, physician consultations, and agonizing uncertainty. My parents had been immediately transported to a hospital for evaluation, subjected to blood tests that confirmed what we'd feared. Both had been given a cocktail of sedatives, anti-anxiety medications, and drugs that induced suggestibility. Ms. Bennett. A gentle voice interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Levine, the FBI's consulting psychiatrist, stood in the doorway. Your parents are ready to see you now. I followed her down a hallway to a comfortable sitting room where my parents waited. The shock of their appearance nearly brought me to my knees. Dad had lost at least 30 pounds, his once robust frame now fragile and hunched. Mom's eyes had a vacant quality, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a paper cup of water. "Raylan," Mom's voice quavered, uncertainty clouding her face. "Is it really you?" I rushed to them, enveloping both in a careful embrace. "It's me. You're safe now." Dad's confusion was more profound. "Where's Dr. Thorne?" He said we were preparing for the next phase. "Thomas," Mom interrupted, a flicker of clarity breaking through her confusion. "Remember what the doctors said? About the medications?" Dr. Levine observed our reunion quietly from the doorway. "Your parents are experiencing the early stages of withdrawal from several powerful substances. The confusion is temporary, but recovery will take time." Over the next few days, as the drugs cleared from their systems, my parents' mental fog gradually lifted. With it came waves of shame, anger, and disbelief at their own actions. How could we have been so blind? Dad wept during a family counseling session. "I gave away our home, your inheritance, to a complete stranger. It wasn't your fault," I insisted, though reconciling my anger with compassion remained a daily struggle. "Thorne was a professional manipulator. The FBI has linked him to similar schemes dating back 15 years. The investigation expanded rapidly once Thorne was in custody. FBI forensic accountants traced millions through offshore accounts. Property records revealed over 30 fraudulent transfers across 7 states. Former followers came forward with stories identical to my parents', all involving isolation from family, financial exploitation, and eventual homelessness when Thorne's promises of lifetime care evaporated. 2 weeks after the raid, Agent Wilson requested a meeting at the FBI field office in Albany. My parents were still at the safe house, working with specialists in cult deprogramming, but were stable enough for me to leave for a few hours. "We're preparing for preliminary hearings," Wilson explained, spreading files across the conference table. "Thorne, or Mercer, which is apparently his legal name, is facing charges in 4 states, plus federal counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." "What about my parents' house?" I asked. "And the other properties he stole?" Wilson sighed. "That's more complicated. The transfers appear legally executed, despite the circumstances. We're working with prosecutors to invalidate them based on undue influence and fraudulent misrepresentation, but it's going to be a lengthy court battle. So, even with Thorne in jail, we could still lose everything?" The injustice burned in my throat. "Not necessarily. We've frozen all associated assets pending trial, including the properties. Your family should prepare for a civil case to run parallel to the criminal proceedings." The preliminary hearing was my first face-to-face encounter with Thorne since the raid. He sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his once immaculate appearance now diminished, though he maintained an eerie composure. As the prosecutor outlined the charges, Thorne's eyes found mine in the gallery. His serene smile faltered momentarily when I held his gaze without flinching. By the time the judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the discovery of stockpiled cash and false identification documents at the Adirondack property, Thorne's mask of spiritual enlightenment had cracked completely. "Your family betrayed the divine purpose," he hissed as officers led him past our row. "The universe punishes those who—" "Save it for someone who still believes your act," I interrupted calmly. "The only divine purpose you served was your own greed." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as former sanctuary members shared their stories. The coverage expanded nationally when investigators discovered Thorne had converted much of his fraudulently obtained wealth into cryptocurrency, over $12 million hidden in digital wallets that required international cooperation to access. The criminal case proceeded methodically while my parents and I began the grueling process of reclaiming our home. Aunt Deborah introduced us to Harrison Wells, an attorney specializing in predatory financial cases, who took on our civil case pro bono after hearing the details. The combination of undue influence, covert medication, and the documented pattern of fraud gives us solid grounds to petition for nullification of the transfer, Wells explained during our first meeting. But these cases can take months, sometimes years. "We don't have years," I argued. My parents have nowhere to live. The sanctuary still legally owns their home, even with Thorne in jail. Which is why we're filing for an emergency injunction to allow your parents temporary residence rights while the case proceeds, Wells replied. Judge Harper has a reputation for protecting victims in cases like this. The injunction was granted, allowing my parents to return to their home, technically still owned by the sanctuary but legally unusable by the organization while litigation proceeded. Walking through the front door with them after weeks away was a bittersweet homecoming. The house had been partially transformed during their absence, walls painted white, family heirlooms replaced with sanctuary symbols, furniture rearranged according to Thorne's energy flow principles. It doesn't feel like home anymore, Mom whispered, trailing her fingers along walls now stripped of family photographs. We'll make it ours again, I promised, already planning restoration projects to reclaim the space both physically and emotionally. The summer faded into fall as criminal proceedings against Thorne and his inner circle continued. My remote work arrangement became permanent, allowing me to remain in Millfield indefinitely. Each day brought small victories in my parents' recovery. Dad gradually engaging with old friends, Mom returning to her garden club, both slowly rebuilding trust in their own judgment. Family therapy sessions revealed the sophisticated manipulation tactics Thorne had employed, isolating vulnerable people during life transitions, creating artificial crises that he alone could solve, establishing dependency through subtle control of medication, sleep, and nutrition. Understanding the science behind the manipulation helped ease my parents' shame, though Dad still struggled with deep depression over his role in nearly losing our family home. I was supposed to protect this legacy, he said one evening as we sat on the porch swing. Your grandfather trusted me to keep it in the family, and it will stay in the family, I assured him, though the legal battle remained uncertain. Grandpa would understand. He'd be proud of how you're fighting to make things right. The criminal trial began in October, drawing national media attention as prosecutors detailed Thorne's decades-long trail of exploitation. My parents took the stand, their testimony powerful despite defense attempts to portray them as willing participants who later regretted their decisions. The most damning evidence came from Thorne's own records, meticulous documentation of his conversion techniques and asset acquisition strategies, including spreadsheets calculating the potential value of each follower based on their property holdings and manipulation susceptibility. When Thorne himself took the stand, his spiritual facade crumbled under cross-examination. His carefully constructed persona gave way to arrogance as he justified his actions as providing meaning to empty lives and creating value through spiritual transformation. And the millions in your cryptocurrency accounts? The prosecutor asked. Was that also for spiritual transformation? Those who guide others to enlightenment deserve compensation, Thorne replied coldly. I created value. I deserved value in return. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge's sentence, 23 years without possibility of parole, plus restitution to victims, triggered applause throughout the courtroom. Our civil case progressed in parallel, bolstered by the criminal conviction. 6 months after Thorne's sentencing, Judge Wilson ruled in our favor, declaring all property transfers to the sanctuary null and void based on clear and convincing evidence of undue influence, misrepresentation, and exploitation of vulnerable individuals. The day we received the official deed restoration documents, my parents held a small ceremony in the living room. We burned a copy of the fraudulent transfer in the fireplace, watching the ashes float upward as symbols of our family's renewal. There's something we want to talk to you about, Mom said once the papers had turned to ash. Your father and I have been discussing the future of the house. Dad cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. We're transferring the deed to you, Raylan. Not in the future, now. This house should have been yours all along, as your grandfather wished. But it's your home, I protested. I don't want to take it from you. You're not taking anything, Mom assured me. We'll live here as long as we're able. But legally, it should be yours. After everything that happened, we need to know it's secure. The property transfer, a legitimate one this time, was completed before Christmas. Unlike Thorne's manipulative legal maneuvers, This exchange was founded in love and trust, with clear provisions for my parents' lifetime residence rights properly documented and recorded. As the new year approached, I launched a foundation with Emma and several other former sanctuary victims. The Bennett Family Trust for Fraud Prevention provided education, legal support, and recovery resources for victims of similar schemes nationwide. The organization grew rapidly, fueled by media coverage of Thorne's conviction and donations from supporters touched by the stories of families rebuilding their lives. My parents became unexpected advocates, sharing their experience at community centers and senior groups, helping others identify warning signs of undue influence and financial exploitation. Their openness transformed their shame into purpose, creating meaning from their trauma. 1 year after the FBI raid, we held a home rededication ceremony. The house had been restored, family photographs returned to their places, heirlooms recovered from storage units where sanctuary members had hidden them, walls repainted in the warm colors my grandfather had originally chosen. Friends, family, and fellow survivors gathered in the living room where Thorne had once delivered his manipulative sermons. My grandfather's antique punch bowl sat on the dining room table, filled with his traditional holiday recipe. The stained glass window caught the winter sunlight, sending familiar rainbow patterns dancing across the restored hardwood floors. "To new beginnings," Dad said, raising his glass in a toast. "And to the legacy that nearly slipped away but is now stronger than ever." As guests mingled throughout the house that had witnessed both betrayal and redemption, I found myself on the porch swing with Emma, watching snowflakes begin to fall on the front lawn. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come home when you did?" she asked. I considered this as I watched my parents through the window, laughing with Aunt Deborah by the fireplace. I think about it every day. 1 more month, maybe even a few more weeks, and it might have been too late. "You saved more than just your family home," Emma reminded me. The Bennett Trust has already helped 15 families recover properties and assets. Inside, someone had started playing the piano, the instrument my grandmother had loved, that Thorne had ordered removed but we'd found and restored. The familiar melody carried through the open window, a song my grandfather used to whistle while working on his endless restoration projects. "Home isn't just about the building," I said, echoing words my grandfather had often repeated. "It's about the story the house tells. Every scratch, every dent, every memory." Our family's story had gained an unexpected chapter, one of betrayal, loss, and near tragedy. But as I watched my parents surrounded by true community, I knew this chapter had strengthened rather than diminished our legacy. The house stood solid against the falling snow, its lights warm against the gathering darkness, secured now for the generations that would follow. In the end, Thorne's attempt to steal our heritage had only made us more determined to preserve it. The foundation we'd established would ensure other families had the resources to protect their own legacies from those who would exploit vulnerability for profit. From near tragedy had come purpose, a different kind of spiritual transformation than Thorne had promised, but infinitely more genuine and lasting. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others recognize the warning signs of manipulation before it's too late.